Welcome to the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, James Faunt Leroy. So good to see all of you here today. The Jaybefaunt channel is also part of Revolutionary Blackout Network, so you can find me there on Sundays and Thursdays. If you guys have not already, go ahead and give a like to the stream. We really appreciate it here on the channel. Thank you so very much. Also, if you would like to, you guys can also subscribe to my Substack at jaybefaunt.substack.com. Gives you email notifications whenever I go live, upload clips, or write any articles. And if you would like a reaction to a question, a video reaction, or if you guys would like to see me react to a particular video, you can do that through qbounty.com/Jaybefaunt. So you guys have that there. So we're going to be talking about a particular subject that is very important to people like myself. And so what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be getting into discussion of reparations. Absolutely. So this is going to be a very interesting story, especially in regards to what's happening with Summer Lee, Representative Summer Lee, and what she has introduced or will be introducing as far as reparations for Black Americans. So I really want to get into this right now. So one of the things that I wanted to get into, as far as Summer Lee is concerned, she is a Democrat, and she is introducing a reparations bill. Now, just to let you guys know, reparation bills have been introduced throughout the years, especially those famously done by John Conyers, who has been introducing reparations bills pretty much every single legislative session, of course, without it ever being passed. And so you've had a lot of, here and there going, well, we just need to do research, or we need to look into it. We need to see exactly what's happening. And then nothing happens, right? They're trying to do it on state levels in many different states. The Democrats tried to do it on the state level very famously in California, but that fell through. And so somebody's trying to do this on the federal level to see if they can get reparations passed. First, before we actually get to the press conference with Summer Lee, I'd like to get into the article first, and then we'll get into the press conference because I have my thoughts that I would like to share. So we're going to do this. This is out of the Hill. And so it says, Democrats reintroduce federal resolution for reparations. So this came out about a day ago. It says a coalition of Democratic lawmakers and advocates on Thursday reintroduced a resolution to offer reparations to descendants of enslaved Africans and people of African descent. Representative Summer Lee led the reintroduction of the Reparations Now resolution, which was first introduced in 2023 by former Representative Cori Bush. Quote, we are here to say that there's no more waiting, no more watering down, no more putting justice on layaway. Black folks are owed more than thoughts and prayers. We're owed repair, we're owed restitution, and we're owed justice. The resolution calls for the federal government to allocate trillions of dollars in reparations to Black Americans to atone for chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and ongoing efforts of other federally sanctioned discriminatory policies. For over 400 years, this country has profited off the stolen labor and the stolen land and the stolen lives of Black people. And that was from Cori Bush. It says, from the first shackled bodies brought to these shores and those that didn't make it to the shores, to the grueling, backbreaking, murderous work done on plantations that built America's wealth, to the federal officials who enslaved human beings while they wrote our laws, even here in this building, America has been cashing checks and writing in Black blood. Lee and Bush on Thursday specifically pointed to the Trump administration's attempts to limit diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, including President Trump's recent efforts to nullify a key component of the Civil Rights Act. It says these harms done to enslaved Africans and subsequently to their descendants for generations to follow are innumerable, but they are well documented, traceable, and persistent. That's what Lee said. Since Trump took office on January, members of the Congressional Black Caucus have introduced multiple pieces of legislation to recognize the nation's history of slavery and discrimination. In March, Senator Cory Booker introduced bipartisan legislation to establish a monument recognizing the historically Black Greenwood District, which was burned to the ground in 1921 in Tulsa Race Massacre. Earlier this month, Representative Ayanna Pressley and Booker led the reintroduction of H.R. 40 that was jumped by John Conyers, says, which would create a federal commission to examine the lasting impact of slavery, systemic racism, and racial discrimination. It would also explore measures such as reparations to address these harms. And so it says Pressley on Thursday condemned Trump's efforts to limit DEI in federal institutions, including threats to defund the Smithsonian. It says we are in a moment of anti-Blackness on steroids and refuse to be silent, adding that Congress has an obligation to right the wrongs of slavery and discrimination. We will not back down in our pursuit of racial justice. The antidote to anti-Blackness is to be pro-Black, and we do it unapologetically. The United States government owes us a debt, and we need reparations now. Efforts to establish reparations for slavery have been ongoing since the end of slavery. Many advocates have pointed to General William Tecumseh Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15, commonly referred to as 40 Acres and a Mule. But the directive, which ordered Confederate land seized in Georgia and South Carolina be split among formerly enslaved Black people in those states, was never carried out. However, white slave owners were compensated for the loss of their land following the end of the Civil War. So, stopping right there, just to add, former slaveholders actually got reparations for losing their slaves in the war. But it didn't go to the actual victims of chattel slavery. And so when people talk about, us not being owed, those of us who are freedmen, Black Americans, that we're not owed, well, when you think about it, were the slaveholders owed? That's a question that some people need to ask themselves, because ultimately you enslaved people, and the people who worked that land were the slaves. It wasn't you who worked that land. So therefore it should go into the hands of the people who actually were the ones that were doing the work, right? Let's continue. In 1989, former Representative John Conyers introduced H.R. 40 for the first time. He would continue to reintroduce the bill each session for 3 decades. Conyers died in 2019. That same year, the NAACP released a resolution detailing the lasting harms of slavery and discrimination and called for federal reparations, including a national apology. In 2021, and Evanston, Illinois became the first U.S. city to create a reparations plan for Black residents. Other states have since followed, including California and Maryland. Reparations are a proposal to level the playing field, but the only way we could ever have a level playing field is by remedying the harms that have been done by the system. We need real concrete action. We need policies that close the racial wealth gap, eliminate Black maternal health disparities, fund education, address environmental racism in our communities. We need reparations. It is a moral obligation that this country owes. And so this is pretty much an overview of the press conference as far as what Ayanna Pressley, Cori Bush, and Summer Lee have actually laid out as far as their stating the demands that is necessary for us to have reparations. Though I do have some pressing questions and I do have some critiques regarding this, and I will lay these out throughout my reaction to the press conference. And so while we have it here, let's go there to the press conference. And so this is from her YouTube channel. Representative Summer Lee reintroduces Reparations Now resolution. So let's take a listen and we'll talk about it throughout.
And Black lives. I am deeply humbled today to be reintroducing the Reparations Now resolution. This resolution was first led by my sister in service, the formidable Cori Bush, who has, thank you. Sister Cori has long sought to repair the injustices that plague our communities, has stood on the front line on intersectional movements and continues to do that. From whether she's inside of the House of Congress or she's outside, we can always rely on her to stand up and to come back and to stand with us. And to be clear, she and I and we stand here not just as a member and former member of Congress, but of descendants of enslaved ancestors, of people whose labor built this country, whose humanity had been denied for centuries. So we're here to say that there's no more waiting, no more watering down, no more putting justice on layaway. Black folks are owed more than thoughts and prayers. Yes. And we're owed repair, we're owed restitution, and we're owed justice. We're reintroducing this critical resolution today because contrary to the desperate, defensive, and deeply inaccurate arguments against justice and equity in this country, attacks on equality, Black economic opportunity, Black health, Black wealth, and so much more are not just a ghost of the past, but they are a very present and ongoing legacy that we are living through right now.
So just to stop there for what she's saying, what Representative Lee is saying is absolutely true. A lot of times people will critique and say, well, that was back then. That was in the past. How are you suffering now? The funny part is people can fully understand how generational wealth will positively benefit someone down the line, but they have some type of cognitive dissonance when it comes to generational poverty and how that's passed down. What's more is the generational trauma that is also passed down from the actions of slaveholders. And these slaveholders are not just private citizens, but many of these slaveholders were also people who were in power. I reference people like Margaret Kimberly in her book, Presidential, Black America and the Presidents. I actually read it and discuss it on my channel. If you guys want to, you guys can actually go into the playlist and go through that. I'm about halfway through the book so far. But, you know, when it comes to the presidents, you know, whether it's Washington, Jefferson, Madison, all these different presidents that we have had since the founding of this country, many of them have been slaveholders, been participants of chattel slavery. And even the ones who people think that were anti-slavery, they really didn't care about Black people or the formerly enslaved at all. Even people like Abraham Lincoln, right? Even though he was the one who wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, and even though Special Field Order Number 15 was, introduced by General William T. Sherman under the Lincoln administration, well, to be honest with you, Abraham Lincoln really, if he could have kept slavery in place while keeping the Union together, he would have done that. And he even said so himself. So when it comes to allies within the federal government, Black Americans do not have allies in the federal government. And I'm also willing to argue that that still exists down to this day, even though we do have Black Americans in the federal government. Let's continue on.
I saw that our friends at Fox News have already picked this up. They scooped us. And as we know, depending on who picks up a story, there's different framings. And it's always interesting to see what framing they're going to use. So some folks like to frame the debate around reparations as Black folks simply complaining about wrongs done in a distant past to our ancestors that nobody today is guilty of. But we know that's not just ahistorical. It's ignoring the reality of today. On today, we are still living through the effects of the brutal kidnapping and trafficking of Africans and the government-sanctioned system of chattel enslavement that ushered this country into existence. We're living through the effects of a government-sanctioned system of sharecropping that replaced it in lieu of reparations to the freed Black Americans who had nothing but their names, an eviction notice, few legal protections, and nowhere to go. We're still living through the government-sanctioned Jim Crow segregation laws that kept Black Americans from equal or sometimes any access to education, jobs, homes, political representation, or safety. No legal recourse for persistent acts of terrorism like public lynching or massacres of towns like Tulsa and Rosewood and so many more. We're still living through the government-sanctioned voter disenfranchisement, followed by government-sanctioned discriminatory housing policies, government-sanctioned mass incarceration, and more. The harms done to enslaved Africans and subsequently their descendants for generations to follow are innumerable, but they are well documented, traceable, and persistent.
So here's one thing that Summerlee will not bring out. While all this that she's saying is true, the discrimination and the suppression and oppression has been done by both parties. I'll give you an example. One of the issues that has, happened to us as far as redlining, right, and being able to get homes within this country was under the Fair Housing Act. Well, the Fair Housing Act was, implemented under Franklin Roosevelt. President Franklin Roosevelt, who was a Democrat. And in doing so, a lot of the discrimination happened under the Fair Housing Act, which meant that between that as well as the GI Bill, then a lot of Black Americans were blocked from actually being able to utilize these services that were implemented by the government. And so because of that, then it placed us in a more financially and economically precarious situation. And so when you look at the actions of both parties, they both are guilty of allowing this to happen. And some people can say, well, it wasn't directly from somebody like an FDR. Well, that may be true, but it was also implemented and directly involved from the state parties, the state Democrat parties as well throughout the United States. Let's not forget as well, another Democrat that had ushered in something that was harmful to us, mass incarceration, who President Joe Biden would actually help implement back in the 1990s. And so while we can talk about how a lot of these policies were being done by the right, it was also being done by liberals, because liberals wanted to keep the system in place instead of fighting for actual true liberation. So that's something that Summerlee's not really going to bring up. She's not going to throw her party under the bus. She'll throw the Republicans under the bus, but she won't throw her party under the bus, even though her party is also part of the harm. They were participants of the harm. They were complicit of the harm that has been done to Black Americans in this country. And on top of it, you got to think about a lot of the things that we have, dealt with down to this day. A lot of times people talk about, well, there's a epidemic of, not enough Black fathers in the household. Well, what happened to a lot of Black men, especially in the 1970s and 1980s, where we had not just a crack epidemic, but we also had an epidemic of heroin as well, right? Because they introduced heroin to our neighborhood so that we wouldn't fight for these GI Bills, right? In fact, I had on Mr. McHenry, on Mr. Keith McHenry, who was the co-founder of Food Not Bombs. He came on Tuesday, and he was talking about how they introduced they introduced heroin into our neighborhoods in order to keep us from actually having the bandwidth to fight for our rights to have, the GI Bill, as well as the Fair Housing Act. And so this also negatively affected a lot of Black men. And then on top of that, you also have the crack epidemic. Crack epidemic was actually, and this is, all, documented how the CIA was actually using and creating crack cocaine to put into our neighborhoods in order to keep us from actually developing ourselves even further. And on top of that, the sale from the crack cocaine actually went to fighting imperialist wars in the global South and South America, because South American countries were actually turning towards socialism instead. And so to fight that, they used the money that they got from off of us by selling us crack cocaine in order to fund the wars that are going on in South America, because they didn't like that the South Americans were using their own sovereignty and self-determination to have a government that they wanted for themselves. See, the United States corporations didn't like that. Just see Chile, right? So that's the thing when it comes to how we were treated. And then on top of that, then you have people like Joe Biden, that because of results of the generational trauma that has been ushered forth through, federal and state actions, then that has harmed us. And so therefore, because of that harm, we act in certain ways in which, as a reaction to that harm, then, they want to pass legislation to criminalize us even further, which is why the 94 crime bill was so devastating to Black Americans. So the stain and the sting of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration still affects us down to this very day. And let's not even get into the psychological and emotional trauma that we still experience as Black Americans in this country, that we have not been able to fully heal from yet. And one of the things I encourage people to do is to look up Dr. Joy DeGruy. She did a lecture on what's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's about an hour, it's about 90 minutes in length, but it's a very good lecture about how the institution of slavery and Jim Crow actually produced a generational trauma that affects us down the line, down to this day. And also, it even affects white people, because the generational trauma of them becoming desensitized to the suffering of Black people has been carried down to this day as well. Let's continue on.
Often hear that slavery was a thing of the past, that our country no longer allows segregation, that Black folks has every access to opportunity available to them. But yet we see how easily centuries of progress and struggles are erased and undone. With a stroke of a pen, the president was able to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not policies or practices or goals that our government or institutions or businesses should implement, even while Black folks are demonstrably underrepresented across colleges and education, higher education, jobs, and all other indices of success or outward mobility. With a stroke of a
So here's the thing. Here's the issue with DEI. DEI actually does not help Black people that much. The main recipients of DEI and affirmative action were actually white women. So when it comes to DEI, feeding this ground about DEI to the Republicans, to the conservatives, to the right, it just don't work. Because ultimately DEI was not a government implementation. It was a corporate implementation to try to appease us without actually doing anything substantive for us. And so because they were doing that as a business decision so they can create more wealth, to create more revenue off of us, as soon as it became convenient to throw us under the bus, they said, all right, you know what? We're done. No more. We're done with them. And so that's exactly what happened. And so for us to seed the ground of DEI, when in reality, we weren't the main beneficiaries of it, bringing that up, it's kind of it's a nothing burger, right? So that's one critique I'll have. It's like DEI wasn't really that big of an issue because we really didn't benefit like in a really substantive way from DEI. It was really just, it was a performative, it was corporate performance in order to make us feel like, oh my goodness, well, we actually have representative people in power. That's the privatized corporate version of electing a Barack Obama. What did it really do for us substantively, right? Nothing at all, really. So let's continue.
But Penn, a president thinks he can eliminate the Office of Civil Rights at the DOJ and the Department of Education, that he can eliminate the Department of Education altogether. With a stroke of a pen, the president thinks he can eliminate thousands of good Black jobs and the mass layoff of federal workers. And by a vote of just 6 people, we can eliminate affirmative action. Reparations are owed because there is a debt that is owed. But more than anything, this moment shows us that the fate of justice and equality and fairness and opportunity for the current living and descendant people of government-sanctioned discrimination or oppression can't be left to the whims of any administration. Where the government has created a harm, it has a duty to repair. So let's make it clear. There is a debt that does exist. This country has taken so much from Black folks and has a debt it owes because for over 400 years into this very day, this country has stolen Black labor, Black lives, Black futures. Industries were built and maintained through the subjugation of Black people in this country, and wealth was built and maintained through the discriminatory policies that still plague us to this day. And to be clear, some people directly benefited from it or are direct beneficiaries of it. We have systems that create and perpetuate imbalances and balances in our society, and you either benefit from it or you are disenfranchised by it. And Black people continue to be disenfranchised and harmed by these systems. Others receive advantages from it. So it was no accident that the Federal Housing Authority denied Black families the ability to purchase homes in certain neighborhoods, and to this day are more likely to be denied a mortgage, while white families were able to build homes and generational wealth. It's no accident that veterans were dishonorably discharged so that they couldn't reap the benefits of the GI Bill, while white veterans were provided education and training benefits to kickstart opportunity for their descendants. It's no accident that highways and transportation and infrastructure projects tore our communities apart and bulldozed Black neighborhoods to the ground because even when Black folks did everything right by building our own communities, our own schools, our own banks, our own churches, they could still be destroyed in a matter of moments. The reality is that Black people have less wealth. We have a maternity mortality crisis. We are more likely to live in polluted areas, more so than any others, because the federal government made it that way. So even though folks today have never owned an enslaved human being, so many are still the direct beneficiaries of the policies and systems and institutions that have made and been put in place. And we know.
Now, a lot of times, here's one thing a lot of people, especially a lot of white people, get confused. When we talk about white privilege, they'll say, well, I lived poor my entire life, so I live right next to y'all. How do I have privilege? White privilege is not purely economic. White privilege means that your life wasn't made harder by the color of your skin. That's what it means. It means that if you were to come into some money and you can go to a neighborhood, you can move into that neighborhood with no issues. If I made some money and I tried to go into those same neighborhoods, I would be denied, even if I have the money and the credit in order to be able to get it. Or let's say I can, but they'll make it even harder for me to get it, because let's say you have a white person with, say, a 720 credit score, and they're trying to get a home in that area, and they're approved with a 720 credit score. I may have to have a 780 or an 800 credit score just to be able to get the same home in the same area, because the threshold is higher for me because they see me as a liability. It's the same thing with, the drugs, right? Think about it. White person gets crack cocaine or cocaine, right? They'll serve 10 years. But that same amount of crack that's sold to us will get 100 years. You know what I mean? It's like a 10-to-1 ratio, because the system of white supremacy sees the lives of a white person as more valuable than the lives of Black people. It's the same way like what's going on in Israel and Palestine, right? It's like for every one Israeli hostage that's given, they're like, all right, we'll give you guys, 15, 20 Palestinians. Because to them, an Israeli life is worth more than a Palestinian life. It's never a one-to-one. It's always, well, their lives are worth more. And so it's the same thing with us. Our lives are worth less than that of a white life. Hell, you can even see when it comes to who goes missing. Let a fairly attractive, Eurocentric, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman go missing. See how many people covered in the news. But take a Black woman, especially with African phenotypes, and let her go missing and see how many people actually bring up her story. See what I mean? So ultimately, it's about either our lives don't worth anything at all, or our lives are worth less than that of a white person. And so therefore, we also get less when it comes to actual policies, material policies that actually affect us. Think about the Homestead Act, where they actually gave land to white people to settle throughout the rest of the countryside of the United States. Where was that for us? It didn't exist. Even though a lot of us knew that land. We knew how to plant crops, and we knew how to grow food, because we were the ones that were doing it in the first place. But they never gave it to us.
No, there will be pushback. And we've all seen the pushback, and we've worked through it. It's why we're here today. Reparations are a proposal to level the playing field, but the only way we could ever have a level playing field is by remedying the harms that have been done by the system. So we need real, concrete action. We need policies that close the racial wealth gap, eliminate Black maternal health disparities, fund education, address environmental racism in our communities, and we need reparations. It is a moral obligation and a debt that this country owes. So today, with my colleagues and with our coalition and movement, I say it again: reparations now, not later, not someday, and not when it's politically convenient. So we're here today to hear the stories of Black folks, to reaffirm our history and our place in it, but also what we are owed as being and having been exploited in this country. So without further ado.
So let's talk about reparations now. Because here's my critique of what Summer Lee is doing. Where was this press conference a few months ago when Joe Biden was still president? Where was this fervor? Because shouldn't we have this same energy when a Democrat's in power? And you can say, well, he didn't have all the control in the House and Senate and the White House. He didn't have all that control. Barack Obama did. Wasn't he the first Black president? Right? And so he had the executive branch, he had a majority in the House, and he had a filibuster-proof Senate, meaning he had 60 seats in the Senate. But here's something that a lot of people are going to have to reckon with. The Democratic Party does not care about giving reparations. Hell, here's my question. Where was the reparations plan when Joe Biden was running for president in 2020? What was it? What was his reparations plan? What was his policy? Did he have one? No. What was Kamala Harris's reparations policy? Where was that? She didn't have one either. What was Barack Obama's reparations policy? Remember, we have been waiting for reparations for 150 years. Remember, slavery allegedly ended in 1865. And we were promised the 40 acres and a mule, right? Special Field Order number 15 in 1865, until President Andrew Johnson, who was Abraham Lincoln's vice president, after Lincoln was offed, Andrew Johnson said, no, you're not getting it. And instead, that reparations that should have went to us went to the slaveholders. So when it comes to the Democratic Party, you'll have some Democrats that mean well, that will continue to introduce the legislation, but never goes anywhere, especially when there's a Democrat in the executive branch and we have a majority in the House and the Senate. It doesn't go anywhere. Why? Because the Democratic Party does not care about Black Americans. And don't think that this is going to be me caping for the Republicans, because guess what? They don't give a damn about us either. Republicans wouldn't even think to introduce a reparations plan at all. So when it comes to political parties, at least for the duopoly, we have no allies. None. The Japanese could get reparations because they were interned. Right? There could be facilitation for Jewish people to get reparations, but nothing for us. There are other people who've got reparations as well. But when it comes to us, they never want to do it. They never really want to give us what is owed. And the thing is, like, it is owed. And with the people who go, oh man, well, if you guys, that's going to be way too much money. That's going to cost us trillions of dollars. I didn't see y'all have that same outrage when back in 2020, March of 2020, the United States dumped $4 trillion into the markets to prop up the corporations. Why aren't you guys asking that same question of how much money does it take for us to maintain almost 800 military bases around the world? Why aren't you asking how much is it going to cost us to take care of these white South African refugees that are coming here? You guys don't ask that question. Or the tax breaks that we're constantly giving to the big pharma, the fossil fuel industry, all the money that we're giving to the military industrial complex, all that. You guys don't seem to ask that question. When it comes to actually helping out a group of people that have been disenfranchised since the founding of this country, then suddenly you want to be hands off. Oh, no, that's not our issue. And here's the thing. You could say, oh, well, that was hundreds of years ago, and so therefore we don't owe you reparations because you weren't the ones that were enslaved. Here's the problem with that. If, let's say, you do harm to somebody and they sue you in a court of law, but you don't pay. And let's say that person who is suing you passes away. Is that debt cleared because that person passed away? Or would the money that is owed to that person go to their next of kin? It would go to their next of kin, right? We are the next of kin. So therefore, because you did not give the reparations to our ancestors that deserved it, guess what? The money that is owed is still there. That debt is still there. So therefore, it goes to the next of kin every generation. And then that money also builds up because you guys keep laying on the damage over and over and over. This reparations could have been a lot cheaper if you guys had given it, let's say, 100 years ago. In 1925, if you all had given enough reparations, it wouldn't cost as much. In fact, it would have been paid in full by now. But you didn't. Because Black people don't matter to you. And so we will still continue to keep demanding what is owed. The government still comes after you for your student loans no matter what, right? All right, well then guess what? We're going to be like the federal government. We're going to look at the federal government and go, hey, no, pay up. And we're not just talking about land. We're not just talking about tax breaks. No, we're talking about cash payment. Let us determine what we want to spend our money on ourselves. You don't get to be paternalistic and tell us what we can and can't spend our money on. No, just give us the cash and we'll do it with however we deem was correct. Because if you owe me money, how are you going to tell me how to spend that money that you owe me? Does that make sense? Right? So I think that's the point. And so I'm going to end with this, because I want to see how my critique of this compares to somebody else's. So let's share this as well. Friend to the channel, Nico House, made this. Let's look at it. Let's talk about it.
Representative Summer Lee and a coalition of Black Democrats plan on introducing a resolution for reparations for Black Americans. And some of you may be wondering why I don't look excited, ecstatic, hopeful, jovial, optimistic. Not in the least, not in the least. And it's because there was once a famous philosopher that had said, where your ass was at when y'all had the house in Sandy. Where your ass was at when your asses had the president. In other words, another example of Democrats pandering to their quote-unquote base, pretending that they are serious about reconciliation, accountability, and actually giving meaningful gains and opportunity to the Black community that absolutely deserves reparations, but they are offering all of this with no ability to pass it. Now, I want to be fair to Summer Lee. She just got an offer, but it isn't just her advocating for these reparations. It's the usual Black suspects who always manage to show up right around the time they have absolutely no power to pass anything. They even brought in the Why We Can't Wait initiative to sit in a congressional briefing and had dozens of community leaders and policymakers there as well to discuss these reparations. And like I said, make no mistake about it, we're living in an era where Donald Trump literally just brought a bunch of white South Africans and plans on bringing more to the United States just because they're white. We live in an era where we are still paying reparations to Israel to the tune of billions every year. And I ain't had a damn thing to do with Nazis, Hitler, or the Holocaust. But somehow my tax dollars are still going over there. And we don't have to go back to slavery to know just how diabolical the Fair Housing Act that FDR passed was, and the damage it did to the Black community via policies such as redlining. We don't have to go back as far as slavery to recognize the damage that was done to the Black community when the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and really Black Wall Streets all over the country were destroyed, which stopped the Black dollar from circulating within the community and instead had it leaving the community going into the pockets of the white wealthy elite. We don't have.
So hang on. Let's pause there for a second. Let's let this breathe. Because we were actually building our own communities, right? And it wasn't just Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was many different areas. Think places like Rosewood, Ocoee, Rosewood, Florida, Ocoee, Florida. You had Seneca Village in New York. You had all these different places where we were actually building ourselves up. And then what happened? Our neighborhoods got firebombed, or they got buried underwater and made into lakes. All because we dared to actually do the capitalist system just like the white people, and we were actually being successful. We were recirculating the black dollar within our own communities in its own little ecosystem. But then guess what? It got wiped out. So we've done the capitalism thing. We tried. We tried to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And when we actually started to get a little bit of air, guess what? Boom. Got hit. And so people ask, well, why isn't, more Black Americans doing well financially? Because the white supremacist government and system keeps sabotaging us. That's why. And so it's the system that's the issue. And, to those of you who are white, what are you doing to change it so that the system no longer treats us like this? What are you doing in order to push for a different system, a system that is equal, equitable, and egalitarian for all? Are you pushing for that? Or are you saying, I got mine, you got to go get yours? Let's continue on.
I have to go back to slavery to discuss how problematic the concept of the urban credit score is, where Black people are forced to pay higher interest rates, even if they have the same level of credit as their white counterparts. I mean, in the United States, damn near everybody who's asked for reparations of some sort has gotten it, except for Black people. So what I'm saying is, I understand why it can't wait and why we shouldn't wait. But my question to you is, do you not see the irony of inviting an organization that's called Why We Can't Wait only to really force us to ask y'all the question, why did y'all wait for the Democrats to lose the House? Why did y'all wait for the shell that was the president, Joe Biden, to leave office before talking about introducing this legislation and holding these committees, enabling him and his administration to avoid accountability if he refused to push this policy that you guys supposedly believe in? If it could.
That is a great question. Because even if, for instance, even if you pushed it during Joe Biden's presidency, if he refused to sign it, that would be your cue to be able to put him on blast. You could put public pressure on somebody like Joe Biden. And let me remind you, the Democrat Party's base is Black people. So if you really want to affect the Democratic Party in a negative way, or if you really want to push the Democratic Party, introduce a reparations bill, especially when the Democrats have control of the House and the Senate. Push it. Do press conferences, do interviews, push it like crazy. And then when they refuse, whether it's the House Majority Leader, whether it's the Senate Majority Leader, or the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader, or the President, if they refuse to bring it to a vote on the floor, if they refuse to be able to sign it into law, or they refuse to have hearings to be able to pass it, put them on blast. And then say, well, look, if you guys don't do this, then I'm going to endorse a third party who actually has reparations on their platform. And yes, there were third parties who actually had reparations on their platform. You have people like Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Joe Stein that both have reparations. They have Black agendas. on their platforms, including reparations for freedmen. You know who didn't? Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. They did not have it because they really don't care about Black people. Let's continue on.
Couldn't wait, then why did y'all wait to ask this question and propose this issue to Kamala Harris, who was literally running on being Black? And this is why I say the Democratic Party is so much more insidious. Because look at Trump and the Republican Party. They made it clear who they work for. Like I just said, they invited a bunch of white people over, filled their administration with a bunch of Zionist Barbies. I mean, immediately went after DEI and then put an apartheid baby in charge of money as if he was qualified for the position. Republicans know who they work for. And when they get the power to do what they can for that part of their base, they wield that power without shame. Oh, but the Democrats pretend to care about Black people. They pretend to care about systemic racism. They pretend to care about police brutality. They'll put on their kente cloth and celebrate Juneteenth and scream about justice for Black Wall Street, and then we'll sign the 94 crime bill, throw y'all asses in jail, and militarize the police more than the damn Republicans. And then when they have the House, when they have the Senate, and they have the executive branch, they spend all their time telling you how it's the Republicans' fault they can't get anything done, which is super weird because Republicans still manage to get damn near everything they want done, even when they don't have all three branches of government. Funny that. So I actually understand why reparations can't wait and shouldn't wait. My question to the Democrats is, if reparations can't wait, then why did y'all literally wait until y'all had zero power to bring it up? And if you're a Black Democrat, why the hell are you waiting so long to leave?
And that's that. You know, I have the same critiques as Nico. And y'all could have pushed this even harder when Joe Biden was president, but you chose not to. And so with that, you know, when it comes to liberation, you know, reparations for Black Americans is a class issue. It is a class issue because it is based on status that we are owed reparations because of the generational trauma and the generational debt that we have been subject to, the economic disparities that we have been subject to because of, you know, slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and mass incarceration, among other things. Let's not, you know, lest we forget about the medical experiments that have happened to us as well. So this is what's important for us to talk about, you know, how do we actually create equity within this country? I recommend that people pick up Dr. Sandy Darity's book, From Here to Equality, because the studies have all been done. We don't need any more studies. We don't need to study how damaging it has been to Black people in the United States. We already know. We have all this information already ready at our fingertips. The only thing that really needs to be done is for that check to be written and to be handed to us. That's pretty much it. And it's not like they can't do it. They literally have the billions and billions and billions of dollars to do it. And you don't even have to give us all of our reparations in one fell swoop. You can do it in installments, but you need to start. And the repair needs to start now. The repair should have started yesterday, should have started decades ago, should have started a century ago, but it still hasn't. So this is why people like myself talk about we need systemic change, meaning that the system, the economic system that we're under has to go. Leave capitalism in the dustbin of history and forget about it. Remember the damage that is done so that we'll never repeat it again, but leave it in that wastebasket. And with that, go ahead and give a like to the stream. Thank you so very much to everybody for joining in. And also, just to let you know, if you guys haven't noticed, my channel is demonetized. So if you like to support the channel, you can support via Patreon or PayPal. And a big shout out and thank you to all the patrons on Patreon for supporting the channel as well. Deeply appreciate it. So with that, I thank you guys very much for tuning in to this special clip. You guys have yourself a great day and continue to fight for other marginalized groups, because ultimately, if you deny justice somewhere, then you're accepting of injustice everywhere. Take care. Thank you so very much for watching my channel, and I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah. Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.